We're opening up the mailbag to answer your questions about potential moves the Heat could make to improve their roster, including a trade with the Chicago Bulls, and how can Bam Adebayo improve this summer? Which young player earns a spot in the rotation? And can the Heat look to the Florida Panthers as a model to win a championship? We'll answer that and more on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day, Monday to Friday. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil, both of us credentialed Heat media members. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. We're opening up the mailbag today. We've got a bunch of great questions to get to, including what developmental project might be the next success story for the Heat. We'll talk about a possible trade for Zach LaVine and what Bam Adebayo can learn by another run on the Olympic team. But let's start with this one from Jorge, who writes in, how can the Heat follow the Florida Panthers blueprint? Move a player that's liked by the fan base if needed, like what they did to get Kachuk. Keep improving the roster every season despite good runs in the playoffs, and not settling to run it back every season. David, I love this question because I asked you this question off the air the other day, and I love that one of our listeners was thinking the same way I was thinking. Watching the Panthers make this Stanley Cup run, you and I were recording this before Game 3 in Edmonton for the Panthers. The Panthers were up 2-0. If you want more on the Panthers run, definitely highly encourage you to check out Locked On Florida Panthers. They do a great job over there. But I'm watching these finals, and I'm like, this is a team that had been in the playoffs for years, couldn't get over the hump, and made, in 2022, a shocking blockbuster trade. They trade Jonathan Huberdeau, who at the time was 28 years old, had been playing for the Panthers for 10 seasons, started his career, just a legend of the franchise, and was coming off arguably his best season of his career. They trade him for a 25-year-old up-and-coming Matthew Kachuk, and so they trade the face of the franchise for this up-and-comer who's entering his prime. The idea being two things, that they're going to basically extend this window, and they're going to modernize the offense a little bit, lean more into scoring, do all these things. They got a new coach during that time. But everybody else on the roster, for the most part, was acquired a couple of years before that huge landmark trade. 2020, 2021, you kind of look down the roster like, okay, most of this core had just gotten here over the last 3 or 4 years. So I was trying to think, and I have an idea, but before I give you my idea, I want to get your idea of what would that look like? What would this version of, like, what would the Florida Panthers version look like for the Miami Heat? What players are you thinking of?
Yeah, I don't know that it's an apples to oranges comparison, obviously, with a much larger roster. And we spent a lot of the summer talking about doing something similar in terms of the idea of Miami having to trade Jimmy Butler. I think he'd be the closest approximation.
That's where it would be. Yeah, that's where you have to start.
It's not realistic either because, he's an older player. So while he is the face of the franchise, he's also an older player. I guess it would start with Jimmy. I guess you could make an argument that it could be Bam Adebayo, but I don't know how you would trade Bam in order to make widespread improvements to this roster. So I guess we could look at it from either perspective. Either you trade Jimmy to kind of jumpstart a regrowth, or trade Bam with the same purpose, and we can kind of break it down that way.
So the interesting thing about Huberdeau and Kachuk is they play the same position.
Sure.
I don't know how much that matters in sort of our hypothetical here. The Bam Adebayo thing wasn't one that I thought of, but it might even be better because I was thinking, how do you trade the face of the franchise, Jimmy Butler, for somebody who's younger and extends your championship window a little bit and maybe even modernizes your style of play a little bit more, which could raise the overall ceiling of the team, even if you might be getting in the short term a worse player. And I think at this point, 2 years after the trade, Kachuk's probably the better player than Huberdeau. So I don't know. I think my first thing was Jimmy Butler. I would like to explore the Bam Adebayo side of it too, though, because he really is in terms of homegrown talent, the way that Huberdeau was. That's more Bam. Jimmy Butler had played for 3 different teams before he played for Miami. But in terms of the Jimmy Butler thing, the easy one was, okay, just trade Jimmy Butler for Donovan Mitchell. But we've kind of talked about that hypothetical already. And it's also not a 1-for-1. I think you could argue Donovan Mitchell's the better player than Jimmy Butler right now. That wouldn't be quite, I mean, it would be, I guess you could have argued that Kachuk was better than Huberdeau at the time if you kind of were projecting forward a little bit. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do something different. I wanted to kind of try to do a little bit more of maybe the same position. So here's what I came up with. It would be like trading Jimmy Butler to the Knicks for Julius Randle. And it would be shocking. And you would be like, what? And it would be a clear step back. However, Julius Randle is 5 years younger than Jimmy Butler, was All-NBA third team a year ago, and was an all-star this year. Generally, I know he was hurt this year, but much more durable. Like that guy, he played before this year where he had a dramatic injury, 77 games the year before that, 72, 71, 64, 73, 82, 74, 81. This dude plays games. He's always available. He averaged 24 points per game last year, 25 points per game the year before that when he was third team All-NBA. Is just a more productive scorer than Jimmy Butler in the regular season. And in terms of modernizing the style of play, gets up between 5 and 6 3-point attempts a game. And maybe they're not always the best 3-point attempts. And I just want to make it clear, I am not saying that the Heat should trade Jimmy Butler for Julius Randle. I was just trying to think of the version of this in the NBA that would be so shocking, and yet you could almost talk yourself into it and be like, well, Julius Randle next to Bam Adebayo, that sort of modernizes Miami's offense. He takes threes, spaces the floor. I don't know. That was what I came up with.
It's not a bad comparison. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, aside from the fact that you're trading away Jimmy Butler, I think it would be pretty terrible for this fan base. I think that
was the tough part about Huberdeau, right? It was nobody could believe it. This is a guy who like grew up wanting to play for the Panthers, played for the Panthers, and then they traded him, and it was shocking.
I know it's kind of fashionable to bag on Randle. I don't think he's helped himself with his overall style of play, but the Knicks fans kind of hate him. You know, Heat fans love hating the Knicks, you know, and Randle hasn't really thrived in the postseason, and we haven't really seen an opportunity. Like, he didn't get a chance to play this offseason. Last year, he was hurt when he was facing against Miami. So, you know, it's been a tough stretch for him. And early in his career, he didn't even make the playoffs because he was playing for some bad teams there. So I've always liked Randle. I think he's got
me too.
I think he has an interesting skill set. There's a lot that he can do. I don't think he's gone through that kind of really bad trajectory in terms of his early careers where he's played for bad teams and bad coaches and hasn't really had much stability. And now he's got a chance to do something, and he's playing in New York. And while he had a chance to take over the team, and they acquired Jalen Brunson, and it's like, oh, sorry, we kind of don't actually need you. And then they swing the trade for Anunoby, and it's like it's just continued to kind of minimize what his role in that team should be. But I think in Miami it would be great. Like, if we're going through with this theoretical, I think he would be a fantastic addition for Miami. And yes, he can do a lot of things that Jimmy can't. But the problem is that, again, Randle in the playoffs is such a big question in comparison to what Jimmy in the playoffs has been.
Yeah,
that it would be very difficult to kind of solve that.
Again, neither you nor I are vouching for the Heat to make these deals. We're just trying to play this out, what that would look like, and then trying to find some of the positive angles of it, of why the Heat could talk themselves into making such a crazy deal. Let's do the Bam Adebayo thing, though.
Okay, I was gonna say, what if it was Randle and like something else? Or
it would almost have to be. So I actually did plug this into the trade machine. Jimmy's making $19 million more than Randle. So it would be Randle and Bojan Bogdanovic coming back.
Ooh, not a big fan of that.
Well, Bogdanovic has got a year left. You could flip him for something else, which is probably what you would have to do anyway. Bam Adebayo. Now, that would be shocking, right? That would be the trade nobody saw coming. Is there a team out there that could use a guy like Bam, who has an up-and-coming star player? Because I do think the thing with Bam, I don't know that he gets much better than where he is now. And I know we'll talk about a question about how he can get better this summer. I think Bam is pretty much what he is. And that's a top 20 player, and in some people's eyes, the best defensive player in the NBA. You can win a championship with Bam as your second or third best player. I'm very confident of that. That's a good player to have. I don't think he ever becomes that number one option. I pretty much think he is who he is at 26 years old. That was sort of the argument, I guess, with Huberdeau, where you were trading him for somebody who has a little bit more upside in Kachuk.
Right.
So as we were talking, I kind of came up with a couple of ideas here. The first one was trading Bam to the Rockets for Alperen Sengun.
Yes.
Now, I don't know that Houston would do that,
No.
and I don't know that Miami would do that. That's sort of the point here. But that would be this kind of trade where you were like, what? And then you're like, wow, I kind of love that for Houston. And then if you're the Heat, if you think Sengun can be the next Nikola Jokic, then you kind of love it for them, even though you're taking a very calculated step back. But I hate it for both teams. I'm disgusting
really
myself
hard.
for even bringing it up. This is really difficult. But that's what I came up with. The other version I came up with, a little bit different, trading Bam to the Magic for like Franz Wagner or something like that, where you're like, okay.
What about Banchero?
I thought about Banchero, maybe. I don't know. That seems a little bit too crazy to me. But maybe, yeah, like Banchero. Yeah, it would. I don't know that the Magic would do that because he was their leading scorer last year. And again, I don't think the Heat would do this either. But it would be something like that, where you got a guy who was just on the brink of his prime, even if you're taking a little bit of a step back, but it could modernize the team a little bit more. I don't know.
Sure. It's really, I don't like either of these theoreticals.
All right, we're gonna move on then. Which one of Miami's in-house development projects should be their next success story? We're gonna talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. What's Prize Picks? Well, it's America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members, and it's the most fun and exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Finals are over, which seems like it's going to be soon. The hoops action doesn't stop on Prize Picks. Women's basketball is just getting started with young stars like, Caitlin Clark. Yeah, she's been in the news a little bit lately. And Angel Reese and many others. They're looking to make their names for themselves alongside greats like Brianna Stewart and Asia Wilson. You can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. And remember, there's always action on Prize Picks, and this is the perfect time to try out something new as basketball is winding down the NBA. Make sure to try our esports this month, because for every Wednesday and Saturday in June, if your lineup doesn't win, you'll get your entry fee back, and you can choose from Counter-Strike 2, Call of Duty, League of Legends, and so much more. Make sure to download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONBA, and you get a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Miami Heat talk every day, 5 days a week, even during the offseason. If you're new to us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. You can also follow us on your favorite podcast app. We're continuing with some of these mailbag questions. Maybe a few more easier on the heart than the last one, David. But this one comes from Brian, who's becoming a mailbag Hall of Famer here.
For sure.
Which of the Miami development projects, in quotations, Orlando Robinson, Alondas Williams, Cole Swider, Jamal Cain, other G Leaguers, do you see stick with the Heat next season? And which ones are ready to play actual 8th to 10th man rotation level minutes? Which of those names stick out to you?
I think Alondas Williams is a guy that could really pop. But I think Jamal Cain is probably the most likely answer, just because he's been with the team for a couple of years. It's a tough call because like Cole Swider has the advantage of being a tall, lanky shooter. At least that's kind of what his reputation is, and that's what he is. He is slotted to provide for Miami, but it just hasn't translated into any kind of quantifiable playing time with the Heat. He hasn't really spent much time with Sioux Falls either. Williams spent a lot of time with Sioux Falls, and then he got the nod later in the season. Cain has just been like, there's so much potential there, and it's weird to kind of see what his role is on this team, although there's going to be an opportunity for him with, again, Caleb Martin and Haywood Highsmith likely to depart in free agency. So there's going to be chances there. I think Williams as a scoring guard could have an opportunity depending on how, the free agency shakes out with DeLon Wright and Patty. But at the same time, I don't know that any of these, there just doesn't seem to be the same kind of hope or expectation, at least not externally. Like, we haven't heard anything. Maybe internally there's some buzz about these players, but it just doesn't feel like they're the next big thing. Like, none of them feel that way, at least not to me. I don't know if you disagree.
Summer League and training camp is going to be huge for all of these guys. I think the team was really high on Orlando Robinson to start the season. It's why they promoted him to the standard contract in Vegas. And it kind of cooled a little bit. He had a chance, right? He had an opportunity to get that backup job behind Bam, Thomas Bryant, him kind of battling it out, and it kind of felt. And eventually, Kevin Love, or pretty quickly, Kevin Love ended up just taking it from both of them. And then Thomas Bryant was the guy, was sort of the third center by the end of the season. Spo ended up going with Bryant. So I don't know. Maybe Orlando Robinson is a year away. I think of this group, they're probably the highest on Alondas Williams, but that also might just be a factor of him being the newest guy and maybe the one that they've seen the least amount of here. I think Cole Swider's probably another year away. I think the shooting is for real. When he was in Sioux Falls, the shooting was for real. When you watch him sort of in the media portions that we're allowed to watch during practice, the shooting is for real. I do question whether or not Jamal Cain's kind of rope is up in Miami. It's been 2 years of him not getting a standard contract now. He really wanted it, and they ended up choosing Orlando Robinson over him going into this past season. If he doesn't get it from the Heat this year, it wouldn't shock me if he negotiated his way out of this two-way contract and tried to find a deal somewhere else to try to get on a roster, which would be his prerogative. I would totally understand it. If it's just not happening in Miami, try to make it happen somewhere else. So it might just be another G Leaguer, but I do agree with what you're saying. It doesn't feel like the next Caleb Martin, Max Strus, Duncan Robinson, Gabe Vincent is in the pipeline right now based on how the Heat feel about these guys right now. But if I had to pick anybody, I would probably say Alondas Williams. And I'm not shutting the door on Cole Swider.
Yeah.
The biggest riser so far. And I think they like what they've seen from Swider. They like his approach. And
what is missing with Cain? Because Cain has all the tools. So my feeling is that he just does not have.
He has no tools. To me, is the problem. He doesn't do anything. You
don't think he's like a long athletic? Okay, maybe at a high.
Okay, yeah. I mean, he's long-ish, but not super long. He's athletic-ish, but not a super above the rim athlete. He's not a great shooter. He's not a great defender. It feels like he's just a big-ish body who has not really made a mark with any one skill. I don't know that he does anything at an NBA level. And I think that's probably the problem right now.
My feeling is probably just doesn't have the kind of tenacity that they're looking for. Like they probably want him to be a little bit more tougher on the inside.
He's also a little lanky. He's not very strong. It's really hard to play defense at where he's at. I think he's still less than 200 pounds, maybe at 200 pounds. There's maybe slightly above 200 pounds, but I don't know. It doesn't really feel like he's filled out in that frame the last couple of years. Who knows? Fast Break Freud writes in, we all know Zach LaVine's stock has dropped, but what are your thoughts on the Heat pursuing LaVine and Caruso in a package deal? Do you think the Bulls are willing to throw Caruso in a deal to just get off that LaVine contract? I want to just, before we answer this question, Casey Johnson, who covers the Chicago Bulls forever, currently does it for NBC Chicago, reported that even though the price was pretty high during the trade deadline when Chicago was initially shopping Zach LaVine, that price is not going to be as high as it once was. And some are speculating that they could even get rid of Zach LaVine in some sort of salary dump. Of course, that coming after Kobe White broke out in the second half of the season, less of a need for Zach LaVine. It feels like they're just trying to create some salary flexibility here. But what do you think? The idea of attaching Caruso to LaVine would be a little surprising to me, considering how untouchable Alex Caruso had reportedly been at the trade deadline. But at the same time, if you're trying to get off that LaVine contract and save yourself $40 million against the books, maybe it's a situation where ownership steps in and says, look, Caruso's only got a year left on his contract anyway at $9-10 million, whatever it is, and we're going to have to pay him to keep him around, or we're probably not going to do that. So get rid of LaVine, and if it takes Caruso to sweeten the deal, we'd rather get rid of Caruso than draft picks who can help us kind of rebuild the team. So I don't think it's crazy, in other words.
Yeah. What would Miami have to give up in order to acquire both?
A lot of salary. That's $50 million worth of salary.
So, yeah, I don't know. I think, again, with LaVine, talented player, obviously, and one who I think is probably slowing down. He's not quite the attack threat that he once was. He's molded into much more of a jump shooter. There's still potential there as a scorer, but I don't know. He struggles. And I think at this point now, it's all about what he is and where he's at in his career, what he wants to be able to accomplish. I don't know that winning is the top priority for him. And so I don't know that he's a guy who can make Miami any better than they currently are, other than the theoretical, well, we've added some talent, we've added a former all-star, etc. I'm kind of out on, I know it's a very divisive point amongst NBA media. Like, some people are really high on him and still see him as an all-star with all this great potential. I just never necessarily gravitated to him. I think he was at a point earlier, like in Minnesota, before they traded him for, ironically, Jimmy Butler, that he was probably at that point where he could have carried a team, and then they got Karl Anthony Towns, and it quite never worked out that way. So I don't know. To me, if I were the Heat, I probably wouldn't be trying to acquire Zach LaVine, even if it meant getting a guy like Caruso. But I'm sure that there are probably people who do feel like he could add something.
I don't think he's better than Tyler Hero. And certainly not at twice the cost of Tyler Hero. That's kind of where I'm at.
He could create some more offense for himself.
Yeah, he's a little bit bigger, but he's dealt with his own injury concerns. And Tyler Hero has too, obviously. I don't think he's definitely not as efficient. I think Tyler Hero is just a straight up better shooter than he is at this point. You look at his last few years, his shot has sort of fallen off here. Tyler Hero is a better rebounder than him. He's probably a better defender, even though that's not saying much. And he's younger. He's got a higher ceiling than LaVine. LaVine's already 28. He's going into his age 29 season. His all-star seasons are that's 2022 and 2021 were his all-star years. Those are a while back. So I wouldn't be very much into the LaVine business if I were Miami, especially considering that he's making $43 million, where Tyler Hero's making $29 million and under a team control that's not the upgrade. That if you're trading Hero, that to me is not worth it. Hero's the better value at his contract and given his upside.
I know there's a lot of, again, a vocal minority that says, just get Hero off the team, etc. That's not the move. Like, you might be frustrated with Tyler can't do, but acquiring LaVine isn't going to fix those problems. You're going to wind up paying him twice as much. That's not worth it. That kind of sets you back even further than where you are right now. And that's not the direction you want to go.
In terms of trying to swing a deal to get both, like if you could maybe talk me into the motivation being, well, really the prize is Alex Caruso, not Zach LaVine. You could trade Tyler Hero and Terry Rozier and basically get to that salary, or Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Jaime Jaquez Jr., and another smaller salary, Orlando Robinson, Thomas Bryant, something like that, and get to that money. I just think there's probably easier ways to get Alex Caruso than also taking on the next 3 years and $150 million, whatever Zach LaVine is owed. And as great as Caruso is defensively, I don't think taking on that salary is worth it, because now you're basically locked into whatever that is. So, all right, that's basically what that is. All right, coming up next, how can Bam elevate his game, and will another run at the Olympics help him do that? We'll talk about that next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Look, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role, and that's why you've got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Who doesn't love that? I've been there before, having to find somebody, kind of have to go through all those resumes, have to find the right fit, have to schedule an interview. You don't have to worry about any of that. LinkedIn takes care of it so much for you. It's not just another job board. They've got a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to find somebody to hire. It gives you access to professionals that you can't find anywhere else. And they do all that while making the process easy and intuitive. It's so easy, in fact, when you've got that many quality candidates, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within less than a day, 24 hours. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats that they might not have the time or the resources to find somebody to hire. And LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They just launched a feature, in fact, that helps you write job descriptions. You don't even have to do that. It makes the process quicker than ever before. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for their hiring purposes. Yours could be next. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Let us know if you would do a Zach LaVine trade if it meant getting Alex Caruso, and what your version of a Florida Panthers-like rebuild would look like. Also, follow us on your favorite podcast app. This next question from the mailbag comes from Drax.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
Sorry. They did something like that in 1995.
Great
Traded
point.
Glenn Rice away.
Such a good point.
Lonzo Mourning. That's it.
That worked out.
It did. It did. But it didn't yield.
You were talking about the LaVine. You're right, it didn't. And we don't know if it's going to lead to a championship for the Panthers either. We have no idea. They're up 2-0. A lot of Stanley Cup to be played here. But you were mentioning the Jimmy Butler, Zach LaVine thing too. The Bulls kind of did that. Jimmy Butler, homegrown talent. They ended up trading him from the younger guy and Zach LaVine. That's basically because of a contract issue, but they still did it.
Yeah.
And that definitely didn't work out. So
no, it did not.
It could go and that was what was so crazy about the Panthers deal. And I think Kachuk I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know hockey circles, but I have friends who are big hockey fans, and I texted them after it happened. They're like, "Oh my God, this is crazy! I love this for the Panthers." Where I don't think anybody, when LaVine was not what Kachuk was. He was like, "Oh, that's kind of an interesting player," not like for sure all-star on the rise. Like, let's go. And now Kachuk is easily one of the best 10 guys in the NHL, and I don't think LaVine ever hit that, and nobody had ever expected. Anyway, Drac72 writes in, how can Bam elevate his game on the Olympic team? What do you think?
He can't. There's no possibility of that. I think, like, we already know what the track to him becoming a better player, a better version of who he is. Like, defensively, there's no improving on what he can do. He is one of the best defenders, if not the best defender in the NBA. It's offensively just taking more shots, expanding his range, knocking that down with accuracy. And guess what? He's not brought onto the Olympic team for that role. He's brought on specifically because he is the best at what he does as a really, 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 really damn good role player. And that's what he's there for. You've got the rest of the roster. You've got Hall of Fame talent up and down that roster. We're assuming that he might even get playing time, considering he's probably going to be backing up Joel Embiid. I'm not so sure how much playing time Bam's even going to get, but when he's out there,
they kind of do like different line shifts in the Olympics. I don't know if he's going to be playing 30 minutes, but he'll play 15 minutes a night, something like that.
So whatever training camp they have in Vegas before they fly off to Paris, etc., like that's not going to be enough time for him to hone his game any. Like, it's going to be some fun bonding. It's going to be some great one-on-one. We're going to see some footage of him going one-on-one against Embiid and others, because it's going to be a half-hearted, kind of joyful experience for him. But he's not going to get better. I don't think anybody's gone to, like, if anything, it's just going to confirm what he already knew, that he is one of the best players in the NBA. And the fact that that's such a hard pill for so many Heat fans to swallow is unbelievable, considering he's already an Olympic gold medalist. And he's been a multi-time All-Star, and he's still such a young player, as you pointed out earlier. Like, he's going to be a two-time gold medalist.
Hopefully.
Like that. Yeah. I mean, likely, right? I mean, maybe I'm putting that cart before the horse, considering Serbia's fielding a pretty good team.
Yeah. I'm with you.
You disagree? Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I already said it. Bam's what he is, and what he is a really good basketball player. And part of the reason I think fans are sometimes frustrated with him is not his fault. It's the fact that this team does not have in the regular season a number one scoring option, and they want Bam Adebayo to be that number one scoring option and also the defensive player of the year. And name the players who are that. Yeah. You can't. Nobody is.
Three. Well, it's three.
Who?
Jordan, Giannis.
Oh, no, I'm talking about now. Now.
Currently? No.
Yeah, nobody. Like, Giannis was, and maybe still is. That would be the closest thing. Okay, so Bam's not Giannis. Does that mean it's a failure? No. So, look, if there's another level for Bam to reach, it's the three-point shot. And I actually saw enough this year where I'm going to say, screw it, take them. I don't care anymore. Start taking the shots. This is ridiculous. The free throw line jumper is cute. It's not efficient. We're done. Start taking threes. You got to. Somebody on this team, one of these stars has to, whether it's Jimmy or Bam. And Jimmy's not changing, but I think Bam has that inner will to scratch a little bit higher on that ceiling. And taking the three is how it's going to happen. But that's still not going to transform him into some number one scoring option. He's a really good player. Just like Drew Holiday is an awesome player. These are championship level players, but they need to be surrounded by a true number one. Not everybody in the NBA can be a number one option, right? And that's not Bam. But Bam is equally important as those guys because of everything else that he does on the floor. He's just not going to be scoring 30 points per game. And again, that's fine. Let's get to our next question here. Nate with the vibes writes in. What's the bare minimum move you would like to see happen this summer? The bare minimum that you would like to see happen. So I don't know if this means that if they just do this, that'll be happy with the offseason overall, but just sort of low-hanging fruit, what's something that this team has to do?
Trade Jimmy Butler.
Wow. Just went there, huh?
I think it's the only move. I really, the more I keep debating it, like, again, people seem to think that we enjoy this, that it's been such a regular topic, but you're at an important crux in the organization here, and I don't see a path to getting out of it. Like, you're not going to continue to be a championship level team with Jimmy continuing to age. That's just not realistic. Nobody else in this roster is taking that leap. We just talked about Bam.
Yep.
People want Tyler gone for like a bag of chips. You know, who's going to fill in that gap as a 23-year-old, 20-plus point per game scorer? There's nobody on that roster. Like, Terry Rozier is a nice addition, but he's supposed to complement all those players. So either you're looking at this roster and saying we've got enough, and if that's the case, then what the hell is anybody complaining about? Or they don't have enough, and if that's the case, then the only move that's really likely in order to get better is to trade Jimmy Butler at his prime and hope that you can get something of decent value in return so that you can start the next phase of rebuilding this team.
Yeah, we should probably do a fuller episode on sort of like the dwindling flame of the Donovan Mitchell possibility here, because more and more it sounds like he's staying put. Yeah. I still don't know that the Trae Young thing is a viable option. I don't know that Atlanta is seriously going to shop him. I still have my skepticism that that's going to happen. And then you kind of go down the list and you're like, well, who else then? And so if that huge trade isn't out there where you're able to kind of cobble together the Tyler Heroes and Jaime Jaquez's and the 3 future first-round picks and all this and go get that star player, if that's not there and it's increasingly looking like it might not be, then you're right. What do you do? And so your option might be to just trade Jimmy Butler. I didn't go so far in that when I was thinking about this, even though I don't disagree with your overall sentiment that the Heat are almost boxed in here. But I would say create some cap flexibility, and there are ways to do that, even if it does take a salary dump of basically it would have to be one of the guards. It would have to be Duncan, Tyler, or Rozier. And if you could salary dump one of those guys, get some future picks back, then you create some financial flexibility under that second apron. You're not under as much pressure, at least financially, to make the most of this season, right? You're not one of the top 6 payrolls in the league making the play-in tournament again. You can probably get under the tax potentially. And that restarts the clock on the repeater tax and all that kind of punitive stuff that create, ownership pressure and things and financial pressure and things like that. And then maybe you were able to get some future picks out of it too. That helps your flexibility in terms of, all right, well, if it's not Donovan and if it's not Trae Young right now, then it'll be somebody at some time, at some point. And now we maybe have another first round pick or two to use in that kind of deal 8 months from now or whatever it is. So, that was sort of what I thought about in terms of bare minimum.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a hard sell, I think. But again, I don't know. If you trade one of those guards, are you materially worse? Are you worse than a play-in tournament team? I don't know. Your ceiling isn't as high, but I don't know that your floor is necessarily all that lower either. And if you're able to create some real cap flexibility where you're able to make another move in free agency and add some draft capital, then I could see the Heat front office talking themselves into doing something like that, even though we've rarely seen this team make those kind of salary dump deals.
For what it's worth, my personal preference would be for the team to run it back, which is really boring, and I know a lot of people hate me, so it's okay.
Including me. That's super boring. No, trade Jimmy Butler for Julius Randle. Shake it up, baby. Let's get it done.
Go Cats.
Go Cats. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app.